So first I thought I'd start off with a little bit of background on the subject tonight. In August of last year, the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency was approached to sponsor a private party to participate in the state of Idaho's Brownfield Assessment Program. That's a program by which generally public entities, whether it's an urban renewal agency or a city or a county or some other form of public entity, can have the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality conduct an environmental assessment on a property that may be questionable or may be suspected to have been previously used for industrial uses or some other similar types of activities that may have led to environmental contamination. Private parties are able to participate in that program, so private landowners or other parties, if they are sponsored by an eligible entity. And so in August of last year, we were approached by Thompson Development to sponsor them for a brownfield assessment of 3 properties that are addressed as 213, 225 Spotswood Street, and 222 Troy Road. At that time, Thompson Development was under contract to purchase the properties with the intent of redeveloping that site and wanted to ensure that there was not some other environmental issues that they may encounter in that process. Through the course of their completing their due diligence, and that the first initial assessment was completed before the end of last year, before the end of 2017. It came back fairly clean. There was just some follow-up assessment. They wanted a little bit of limited phase 2 work to ensure that some sumps were still properly connected to the sanitary or storm systems in the car wash area of the subject property, just to make sure that there wasn't anything that needed to be addressed in that limited scope. But during that process of doing their due diligence, they did identify that the property was within the designated 100-year floodplain, which does have additional development conditions that are associated with that. Within the city of Moscow, we do go kind of above and beyond the base National Flood Insurance Program requirements, which generally requires that all properties or new developments within the designated 100-year floodplain have their first finished floor developed at an elevation that is up to the base flood elevation. Within the city of Moscow, we do require what's considered to be additional freeboard, so any development within the designated 100-year floodplain, the first finished floor has to be elevated 2 feet above the base flood elevation. That's intended to reduce the risk of property damage due to flooding events, and because of that additional requirements, we do receive, or all policyholders within the city of Moscow get a reduction on their flood insurance policies, because we participate in a program called the Community Rating Service. So we do additional public outreach and communication. We have the additional freeboard requirements. And because of those additional flood damage mitigation efforts, all policyholders within the city of Moscow get a 15% reduction on their flood insurance policy. The result on this individual site, because of the fact that the property is currently mapped in the floodplain and the relative elevation of the property to the floodplain elevation, is that any new structures developed on this site could be required to be elevated between 3 to 4 feet above the ground surface that exists there today. And that does present some costs as well as additional challenges for ADA access and sidewalk approach and accesses into a building when it has to be elevated that high above the grade in the location. So this is a property in question. So the Troy Highway here is located on the south side, Spotswood Street's here to the north, and Jefferson is located to the east of the site. So it's a triangular shaped property. It currently is occupied by a car wash on one side. There's a building that's been used for a number of uses as a locksmith shop, an auto detail shop as well, and then there's one residential unit located in the northeast corner of the property. But that's the property in question, and I'm sure most people are probably familiar with that property there located near the south couplet. So the property, as I noted, is located within the floodplain boundary, and you can see that the floodplain expands quite significantly in that location and covers the individual property. As we began to kind of look at that a little bit closer, it appeared that current floodplain boundary could be the result of some outdated mapping information within FEMA's model that they used to run the hydraulic model to indicate where the floodplain would exist during those flooding events. There are 3 specific bridges that are in the model still that no longer exist and were removed about 25 years ago. And it does not include the new 95 crossing of Paradise Creek that happened with the South Couplet construction during the late 90s. There have also been some other changes or other remapping efforts to the floodplain within the community. In 2012 and 13, the University of Idaho completed the Paradise Creek East Ecosystem Restoration Project. That was the daylighting project at Paradise Creek North around the Student Rec Center. And at the end of that process, they did a new flood study that unfortunately only extended up to the 95 crossing. And it resulted in very significant reductions of floodplain boundaries within the community from that point of 95 west really to the state line. Within this specific area, while these 3 parcels were the reason why it came to our attention, there are 29 parcels that are included in floodplain in that area. And approximately half of those are located within Legacy Crossing District, which is why the agency began the conversation, and then roughly half of those are outside the district, but obviously still within the city of Moscow. Any lowering or reductions of the regulatory floodplain certainly helps with redevelopment of the properties, ADA access, and reduction of cost, and also can result in a removal of the need of a homeowner to carry flood insurance on their property, which, if they're not within the floodplain, would certainly be an expense I'm sure everybody would like to avoid having to incur. Certainly have the option of carrying that flood insurance if they want to be cautious and sure that they're covered against that kind of damage, but at least the requirement that their lender would require them to carry that insurance could be removed. So just kind of an example of the remap the University of Idaho did in 2012 and 13. 95 again here is right here at this point. But the study really picked up just downstream of the 95 bridge and went out to the state line. So the floodplain boundary, and this is 6th Street, you can kind of orient yourself, here's 6th and Main. So the floodplain almost reached the intersection of 6th and Main in the downtown area and then extended far north, and this is the Pullman Highway coming across. So Furniture Center is probably right about here with Llewellyn. You can see it kind of extended fairly substantially north of the Pullman Highway in that location. And this was a resulting floodplain that was determined after the U of I did the daylighting project. So it was a very large, significant reduction of the floodplain in the area. But unfortunately, that study ended right at this point where, again, the floodplain does expand as you move upstream. And again, that's the area that we're discussing. So if you go back, and this actually photo is from 1990, so not that old. We have one's pretty similar to from the 1960s. But if you look in this area, 95, Main Street was 95 and extended due north through town. And you can see that there are a couple railroad crossings, and then there's a bridge located here that was called the Concrete Plant Bridge on the FEMA studies. This was a concrete mix plant that was located there, and this was a bridge that was utilized to gain access to that site from the Troy Highway, Troy Road. And this is what it looks like today. So those rail crossings, the old 95 bridge still is there, and you can see that as you're on from Main Street. This new bridge structure is not within the model. The 2 rail crossings that existed here no longer exist, and that concrete plant bridge was right about here. It's really just on the downstream side of the new 95 bridge crossing of Paradise Creek there. So we've had fairly substantial changes that have happened in that area since the last time that was modeled. These are the 29 parcels that are currently affected. So those are the 29 parcels that are within the map floodplain in that area that could potentially benefit should there be some reduction of floodplain boundaries or elevations. So this is really what you see when you see that floodplain boundary that's fairly narrow as it approaches the 95 crossing and then really gets wide afterwards. This is the big drop, and so this is a profile of the creek, and this is the creek bottom as you're going from upstream to downstream. And this is right in the middle of this is that concrete bridge, concrete plant bridge. Is located right here, right in the middle of the flows. And the 3 multiple bridge crossings that no longer exist all appear right in this area. And you can see there's a very large drop in the flood elevations on the upstream side versus downstream. And actually, if you look at it a little bit closer, you have nearly 6 feet, 6.5 feet of flood elevation drop from the upstream side to the downstream. That's not necessarily, I think, what we're accustomed to observing in that area. That's almost, waterfall category of drop in that area. And I don't think that that's really been observed during recent high water events that we've seen kind of that significant of drop in those flood elevations. And here, this outline in pink is the extent of that concrete bridge. So it was fairly thick deck, really right kind of in the middle of the flow. And so that was certainly a large flow obstruction. You can see the downstream railroad bridges and the old Main Street bridge here well above kind of the flood elevation. So this was the bridge really that was causing the greatest impediment to flow through that area that no longer exists. When this topic came before the agency, with the agency's interaction with the developer previously on the site, The agency did agree to fund a preliminary floodplain study, and we wanted to kind of move in steps at fairly low investment up front because we knew there was going to be some expense to this effort. And so we worked with Alta, previously TerraGraphics Environmental Engineering, now Alta Engineering Science, to kind of scope out a floodplain study that will allow us to step into an assessment of that area. Phase 2 was really for them to take the currently effective model, convert it to the new platform, so it was in HEC 2, which is the old version of the FEMA's flood modeling software, bring it into HEC RAS, which is the current modeling software, remove the bridges that don't exist any longer, and then add the new 95 bridge in based on construction drawings. And rerun the model to see if we were going to see a substantial change in flooding elevations in the area. The survey is a fairly high expense, and so we wanted to try to avoid that and do a preliminary look to see if we expected to see any significant benefits from this effort.